There is a ghost in the machine of history, a silent, repeating pattern that has, 3 times in the modern era, lured a global superpower to the precipice and then pushed it over the edge. This isn't a theory. It's an autopsy of fallen giants. And right now, in 2025, the United States is not just flirting with this pattern. It has already embraced it. We have passed 5 of the 7 stages that dismantled the Spanish Empire, dissolved the British Empire, and vaporized the Soviet Union. We are not approaching the cliff. We are in mid-air, hurtling towards the same canyon that swallowed every superpower before us. This is the story of the 7 stages of imperial collapse, and the terrifying reality that America has already reached stage 5. To understand our future, we must first understand what imperial collapse truly looks like. It is not a dramatic, cinematic explosion. It is not an invading army storming the beaches. It is a slow, insidious poison, a quiet suffocation. It begins with a simple, almost imperceptible shift: economic exhaustion. The empire stretches, itself so thin that its own weight becomes its greatest enemy. A military deployed to every corner of the globe, promises made to 100 allies, debts piling up like unmarked graves. At first, everything appears normal. The currency still trades, the flags still fly, the speeches still echo with confidence. But beneath the polished surface, the foundation is turning to dust. Resources are wasted. Factories fall silent. And the most ambitious citizens begin to look elsewhere for opportunity. Then the acceleration begins. It's a quiet, chilling process. Allies start making side deals. Old enemies test the fences, probing for weakness. Trading partners, once dependent, begin to build their own systems. The one advantage that seemed unshakable, the global reserve currency, starts to erode. And in a terrifying reversal, the very tools of power become instruments of self-destruction. The currency, once demanded by the world, comes flooding back home, worthless. The military, spread across continents, becomes a bankrupting liability. The promises, once backed by unassailable strength, become empty words whispered into the wind. This is not a dystopian fantasy. This is the precise, documented history of Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. They all made the same fatal assumptions. They believed their power was a permanent feature of the world. They overextended their reach, debased their money, and clung to their illusions until the ground disappeared beneath their feet. Let's begin with the original blueprint: Imperial Spain. In the 16th century, Spain was not just a kingdom. It was a force of nature. After Columbus stumbled upon the New World, Spanish conquistadors toppled the Aztec and Inca empires, seizing control of mines that vomited forth unimaginable wealth. By 1550, Spanish galleons were a constant stream of white sails on the Atlantic, carrying over 200 tons of silver per year. Back to Seville. By 1600, that number had doubled. Spain didn't just have money. It was money. The Spanish real was the world's dollar. Every merchant, every king, every banker needed Spanish silver. This was the genesis of the pattern. A nation that controls the world's financial lifeblood and mistakes that temporary privilege for permanent invincibility. King Philip II, ruler of this oceanic empire, sat in his palace, the Escorial, and believed his treasury was bottomless. And so, he spent stage 1, military overextension. Philip's Spain was a nation perpetually at war. It fought the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, France and Italy in Europe, Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, and the English Navy in the Channel. It had campaigns in the Philippines and skirmishes in the Americas. The Spanish Tercio, the most feared infantry formation in the world, was deployed on 4 continents simultaneously. The cost was astronomical. Over half of Spain's entire revenue was consumed by the military machine. Yet it was never enough. Victory in one theater only created 2 new fires elsewhere. Stage 2, currency debasement. The crown, drowning in bills it couldn't pay, performed the oldest trick in the book. They began to secretly mix copper into the silver coins. A coin that was supposed to be pure silver became half copper, then mostly copper. The face value was the same, but the real value plummeted. It was a silent tax, a theft of trust. Merchants, no fools, noticed. They demanded more coins for the same goods. Inflation, a concept once foreign to Europe, exploded. The very silver that built the empire was now being hollowed out from within. Stage 3. The debt spiral. Even with all the silver and the currency tricks, Spain was broke. So it borrowed heavily from German bankers, Italian financiers, anyone. With capital, the debt grew like a cancer. In 1557, just 2 decades into Philip's reign, Spain declared bankruptcy. It defaulted on its loans, wiped the slate clean through brutal negotiation, and then immediately started borrowing again. It declared bankruptcy again in 1560, again in 1575, and again in 1596, for state collapses in 40 years. Each time they promised reform. Each time they returned to the narcotic of debt.
Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. This is the most tragic and misunderstood part of Spain's fall. They had all the gold and silver in the world, and it made them poor. When money is limitless, the incentive to produce vanishes. Why till a field when you can import food from France? Why build a workshop when you can buy goods from the Dutch? Why innovate when you can simply purchase? The Spanish nobility saw manual labor and commerce as beneath them. Spanish agriculture withered. Spanish manufacturing collapsed. The empire became a colossal funnel. Silver from Potosi would arrive in Seville and flow straight out to Antwerp, Genoa, and London to pay for the very things Spain no longer knew how to make. The wealth flowed through them, but it did not stick. When the silver mines began to deplete, the entire illusion shattered. Stage 5. Social decay. As the economy crumbled, the social fabric tore. The streets of Madrid swarmed with beggars and bankrupt nobles clinging to empty titles. The productive citizens, the artisans, the merchants, the ambitious emigrated to France, England, and the Netherlands, taking their energy and intellect with them. Spain was left with a bloated bureaucracy, a bitter military, and a disillusioned clergy. A society that had stopped creating wealth was now only consuming the remnants of its past. By 1650, it was over. Portugal was gone. The Netherlands, their richest province, was independent. The Spanish Empire was a hollowed-out shell, a ghost ship drifting on the currents of history. Descendants of the conquistadors became a tourist attraction. This is what imperial collapse looks like. It's not a bang. It's a long, slow sigh into irrelevance. But Spain was only the first patient zero. 3 centuries later, a new empire emerged, one so vast it claimed the sun never set on its territory. It too would catch the same disease, follow the same 7-stage script, and meet the same fate. And the choices it made, the very same choices America is making today, would lead it down a path from which no empire has ever returned. The unlearning of power. The British Empire of the early 20th century was a spectacle of human ambition made real. It controlled a quarter of the Earth's landmass, governing hundreds of millions of people from the Caribbean to the Khyber Pass. The pound sterling was not just a currency. It was the bedrock of global commerce. Every trade deal, every bond, every central bank's vault was anchored in British pounds. London was the pulsating heart of world finance. The British ruling class, gazing upon their global domain, suffered from the same fatal conceit as the Spanish Habsburgs. They believed it was the natural, permanent order of the world. They were already deep inside the pattern and they didn't even know it. Stage 1. Military overextension. The British Empire was a sprawling, fragile ecosystem of commitments. It had to defend India's northwest frontier, secure the Suez Canal, patrol the South China Sea, suppress rebellions in Africa, and maintain a fleet powerful enough to challenge any 2 navies combined. The cost was staggering, a constant drain on the treasury. Then in 1914, the guns of August sounded. World War I presented Britain with an existential choice: remain neutral and watch the European balance of power shatter, or enter the fray and risk the very empire they were trying to preserve. they chose war. The cost was over $40 billion, the equivalent of well over $1 trillion today. To pay for it, they did the unthinkable. They became debtors to their former colony, the United States. They had won the war, but in doing so, they had mortgaged their future. Stage 2, currency debasement. The pound sterling was meant to be as solid as the gold it represented. But the war had bled Britain's gold reserves dry, shipped across the Atlantic to pay for American ships and shells. In a desperate attempt to reclaim past glory, in 1925, Chancellor of the Exchequer Winston Churchill returned the pound to the gold standard at its pre-war parity. It was a catastrophic error. The pound was now wildly overvalued. British coal, British textiles, British steel became too expensive for the world. Exports collapsed, mines and factories shut down. Unemployment soared into the millions. To protect the overvalued currency, the government had to keep interest rates punishingly high, strangling any chance of economic recovery. The system was unsustainable. In 1931, Britain was forced to abandon the gold standard. The pound plummeted by 25%. In that single moment, the world's trust in the bedrock of global finance was fractured. The empire had admitted it could not keep its most fundamental promise. Stage 3, the debt spiral. Britain never recovered from the financial hemorrhage of the First World War. Then, just as it was staggering to its feet, the Second World War began. The cost this time was even more astronomical, over $120 billion. Again, the lifeline came from the United States, through the Lend-Lease program that left Britain drowning in debt. By 1945, the war was won, but the empire was bankrupt. The United States held all the cards. The mantle of global leadership had been forcibly passed. Stage 4, loss of empire. The collapse came not with a fight, but with a whimper. In 1947, Britain simply let go of India, the jewel in the crown, the source of its wealth and prestige for 2 centuries. It wasn't a voluntary grant of freedom. It was a financial necessity. They could no longer afford to hold it. This triggered a cascade. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, nation after nation in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia lowered the Union Jack for the last time. It was a fire sale of imperial possessions. By 1970, the British Empire was a memory. Stage 5, currency collapse and social realignment. The pound's decline was a slow-motion car crash. In 1940, £1 was worth over $4. By 1980, it was barely worth $2. Today, it hovers around $1.27. The global reserve currency had been reduced to a regional one. Britain clung to the artifacts of power, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, nuclear weapons, a special relationship with America. But these were relics, the trappings of a ghost. The nation that had once dictated terms to the world was now a middle power, a beloved museum piece of a bygone era. The empire was gone, and it never came back. Now let's examine the most recent, and perhaps most chilling, case study, the Soviet Union. After the victory in World War II, the USSR stood as a colossus. It had matched America in nuclear terror, planted its flag in space, and held Eastern Europe in an iron grip. The Soviet leadership genuinely believed their centralized command economy was the future, destined to surpass and bury the chaotic capitalism of the West. For decades, the world saw a facade of brutal strength. But inside, the system was rotting. Stage 1, military overextension. The Soviets dedicated a mind-boggling 15 to 20% of their entire GDP to the military, an effort 3 times more intense relative to their economy than America's. They had to match the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, and NATO's armies. They poured billions into a quagmire in Afghanistan, propped up Castro's Cuba, and subsidized regimes from Syria to Vietnam. They were playing a global chess game with an economy the size of Texas. Stage 2, economic stagnation. By the 1970s, the Soviet economy was a corpse on life support. Only oil exports kept the heart monitor beeping. Everything else was failing. State-owned factories produced shoddy goods that no one wanted. Vast, fertile farmlands, collectivized into inefficiency, could not feed the population. The Soviet Union, a potential breadbasket of the world, became the world's largest importer of grain. Innovation was a crime against the state plan. Why invent a better tractor when the quota is measured in tons of steel, not efficiency? Stage 3. Currency collapse. The Soviet ruble was a joke, a worthless token. It was not convertible on world markets. Even Soviet citizens, when they could, sought US dollars on the black market, the only currency with real purchasing power. The Kremlin had to buy vital technology and food with hard assets, gold and oil, because no one would accept their paper. Stage 4. Loss of empire. In 1989, the dam broke. The Berlin Wall, the concrete symbol of their empire, was torn down not by tanks but by jubilant citizens. One by one, the satellite states of Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia peacefully slipped away. The Soviet Union, economically comatose, could do nothing but watch. The strategic buffer that had taken a world war to build vanished in a single year. Stage 5. Complete collapse. Then, on December 26, 1991, the unthinkable happened. The Soviet Union simply voted itself out of existence. In just 900 days from the fall of the Berlin Wall, a superpower armed with 30,000 nuclear weapons dissolved. Not from a lost war, not from an invasion, but from internal economic implosion. The state ran out of real money, the military couldn't be paid. The government couldn't function. The pattern had completed its work with brutal, mechanical efficiency. 3 empires, 3 different eras, one identical pattern of self-destruction. And as we stand here today, the evidence is no longer historical, it is current events. The United States has, with breathtaking precision, already replicated the first 5 stages of this death spiral. The ghost is no longer in the machine of history. It is in our machine. And the final 2 stages, the point of no return, are now coming into view, the American rehearsal. We now arrive at the uncomfortable, undeniable present. The United States of America, for the past several decades, has been conducting a detailed, almost perfect rehearsal of the same playbook that doomed its predecessors. We have not been immune to history's laws. We have been diligently following them, stage by fateful stage. Stage 1. Military overextension. The United States maintains a global military presence unprecedented in human history. Over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries. Troops stationed in approximately 150 nations. We are treaty-bound to defend all of Europe through NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and countless other allies. We are simultaneously conducting counter-terror operations in the Middle East and Africa, countering a resurgent Russia in Europe, and preparing for a potential conflict with China in the Pacific. Our military budget, at over $850 billion annually, dwarfs the combined spending of the next 10 nations. Yet this immense force is stretched to its breaking point. Aircraft carriers are deployed beyond their sustainable cycles. Military equipment is aging from constant use. Recruitment is in a crisis, with all branches struggling to meet their targets. The hard, cold truth is this. If a major conflict erupts with China over Taiwan at the same time Russia tests Article 5 in Eastern Europe, our military, for all its cost, would be forced to make impossible choices. We are overextended. The pattern's first checkmark is firmly in place. Stage 6. Loss of reserve currency status. This is the great unraveling. For decades, the US dollar's exorbitant privilege has been our ultimate shield. It has allowed us to run massive deficits, print money, and export our inflation to the rest of the world. But that privilege is not a divine right. It is a revocable grant of trust from the global community. And that trust is now being questioned. We are seeing the early tremors. The BRICS coalition, for all its internal contradictions, is actively building a financial infrastructure designed to bypass the dollar. Central banks around the world, particularly in China and Russia, have been accumulating gold at a historic pace, a classic hedge against a failing fiat system. Bilateral trade deals are increasingly being settled in local currencies. China and Russia trade in yuan and rubles. India buys Iranian oil in rupees. Saudi Arabia has begun accepting yuan for some of its oil exports. Each of these is a small crack in the dam. For now, they are manageable. But the shift will not be linear, it will be exponential. One day, a critical mass will be reached. A major commodity, like oil, will be priced in a basket of currencies instead of dollars. A coalition of nations will create a viable alternative for international settlements. And then the cascade will begin. The trillions of dollars held in foreign reserves as a safe asset will no longer be needed. They will come flooding back to the United States, a tidal wave of currency searching for a home that no longer exists. This dollar glut will trigger hyperinflation overnight. The cost of every imported good from your car to your groceries to your medicine will skyrocket. The American standard of living will evaporate before our eyes. Stage 7. Collapse. This is not a gradual decline into a quieter, gentler nation. Imperial collapse is a sudden, violent, and systemic failure. It is the simultaneous triggering of a currency crisis, a debt crisis, and a political crisis. Imagine this sequence. A geopolitical shock, perhaps a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, forces the U.S. to engage in a major, costly war. To fund it, the Treasury is forced to issue trillions more in debt. But with the dollar status already wobbling, global demand for that debt plummets. Interest rates spike to 15, 20, 25% to attract buyers. The $1 trillion annual interest payment becomes $3 trillion. Then $5 trillion more than the entire federal budget can cover. The government faces an impossible choice: default on its debt, instantly vaporizing the global financial system, or activate the printing presses on a scale never before imagined, destroying the currency completely. At this point, the collapse becomes self-reinforcing. The military, its budget eviscerated by hyperinflation, can no longer project power or even pay its troops. Global bases are shuttered overnight. Allies are abandoned. The promise of American protection, the cornerstone of global order for 80 years, vanishes. Domestically, the social contract shatters. The government cannot fund Social Security, Medicare, or the military. Civil unrest becomes the norm. The United States would not cease to exist on a map, but its identity as a global superpower would. It would become a large, troubled country, grappling with internal chaos and holding on to nuclear weapons as the last relic of its former glory, a fate eerily similar to post-Soviet Russia. 3 empires believed they were the exception to the rule. Spain had gold and silver. Britain had the Royal Navy and the pound. The Soviet Union had the revolutionary spirit and the Red Army. America believes in its constitution, its innovation, and the mighty dollar. But the pattern is a force of physics, not sentiment. It does not care about your founding documents or your technological prowess. The mathematics of debt, the psychology of currency, and the geography of overextension are immutable. We are at a crossroads, but the exit ramp is closing fast. Since 2020, we have not been cautiously navigating this path. We have been stampeding down it, accelerating every single stage with unprecedented fiscal and monetary stimulus, political division, and strategic overcommitment. Can we stop it? The pattern says the sequence is locked in once the first 5 stages are complete. But perhaps, just perhaps, America can be the first empire in 500 years to prove the pattern wrong. It would require a national awakening of a scale we have not seen since World War II. It would demand a radical restructuring of our economy, a restoration of our productive capacity, a painful fiscal sobering up, and a strategic retrenchment of our global commitments. The math, however, is not on our side. History, the silent judge, is not on our side. The ghost in the machine is whispering that the script has already been written, the stages have been set, and the final act is approaching. The only thing left to discover is how long the audience will keep applauding, believing the show will never end. Stage 2, currency debasement. In 1971, President Nixon severed the U.S. dollar's last link to gold. The world embarked on a grand experiment, a global economy built on a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith in U.S. government promises. Since then, the debasement has been relentless. Since the year 2000, the U.S. money supply, M2, has exploded by over 400%. Since the pandemic year of 2020 alone, we have injected over $6 trillion of new money into the system through various forms of stimulus. The result? The U.S. dollar has lost over 98% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve's creation in 1913. We are not mixing copper with our silver. We are performing the digital age equivalent, diluting the value of every single dollar in existence with a flood of new currency. The mechanism is more sophisticated than King Philip's mints, but the outcome is identical: the slow, steady destruction of the currency's core value. Stage 3. The debt spiral. The U.S. national debt now stands at a staggering $36 trillion and climbing, a figure that exceeds 120% of the nation's entire annual economic output. We are not merely living beyond our means, we are financing our present by pawning our future. The most terrifying part of this spiral is the interest. We are now spending nearly $1 trillion per year just on interest payments on the debt, a sum that now rivals or even exceeds the entire defense budget. And we are adding to this debt even in times of peace and economic growth, with annual deficits running consistently over $1.5 trillion. This is the mathematical definition of a death spiral: borrowing money not to build for tomorrow, but simply to pay the interest on what we borrowed yesterday. Spain defaulted 4 times. Britain borrowed until it lost its empire. The USSR ran out of credit and collapsed. The path is worn and we are marching down it. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. The United States has undergone a profound transformation from a manufacturing powerhouse to a financialized, service-based economy. We are brilliant at designing iPhones, but we don't build them here. We are masters of finance, but we don't forge the steel for our own bridges. Our trade deficit consistently runs at hundreds of billions of dollars a year as we consume far more than we produce. Critical supply chains for everything from pharmaceuticals and semiconductors to rare earth minerals and even basic military components run through geopolitical rivals like China. The parallel to Spain is unnerving. Just as Spain became a passive conduit for New World silver to flow out to its European rivals in exchange for finished goods, America has become a conduit for dollars to flow out to the world in exchange for the tangible products we no longer make. When the flow of easy money and credit constricts, the entire edifice is in peril. Stage 5. Social decay. The signs are no longer subtle, they are visceral. Trust in every major institution, the government, the media, the justice system, the medical establishment has cratered to historic lows. Cities grapple with spiraling crime rates and open-air drug markets. A homelessness crisis unfolds on the streets of the wealthiest nation on earth. Over 100,000 Americans die from drug overdoses every year, a number that dwarfs annual combat deaths during the entire Vietnam War. Political discourse is not just polarized. It is tribal, dysfunctional, and increasingly hostile. The fertility rate has fallen below replacement level, a classic signal of societal pessimism. The American dream, the engine of our optimism and dynamism, is flickering. The best and brightest don't always leave physically, but many are checking out, opting for disengagement or cynicism. The social contract is fraying. Check, we are here. Stage 5. The same stage where the Soviet Union ceased to exist. The same stage where Britain accepted its fate as a secondary power. The pattern is not a prediction, it is a diagnosis. And a patient who has completed the first 5 stages of a terminal illness does not need a fortune teller. They need a miracle. But the final act of this tragedy has 2 more scenes. And what makes them so dangerous is that they don't feel like a crisis until it is far, far too late. The next stage is already beginning to flicker on the global stage. A silent, slow-motion run on the bank that most people will miss until the doors are already chained shut. The point of no return. We have traced the pattern through the ruins of 3 empires and laid its blueprint over the modern United States. The correlation is undeniable. But history's final lesson is not in the decline, it is in the collapse. The final 2 stages are where the slow-burning fuse reaches the powder keg.